This week we will look at some aspects of gender and culture and discuss how they influence counseling. Before we start, please pause a moment to think about these questions. What does it mean to be a man or a woman in the U.S.? How does culture influence our ideas about what it means to be a man or a woman? And how is gender relevant in counseling interactions? In order to help frame our discussion, here are a few important definitions. Gender: behaviors or patterns of activities that a society or culture deems appropriate for men and women. Gender role: the degree to which a person adopts the gender-specific behaviors ascribed by his or her culture. Gender identity: the degree to which a person has awareness or recognition that he or she adopts a particular gender role. And gender stereotypes: the psychological or behavioral characteristics typically associated with men or women. We can see right away that culture and context has a great influence on gender roles and expectations. Our identity, on the other hand, is our own personal awareness of the degree to which we adopt a particular gender role. Some questions for you about gender roles and expectations. In most cultures, we have what is called a division of labor. Women are responsible for some things, men for other things. What is your understanding of who does what and why? What is the cultural norm for deciding which gender is responsible for a given task? Have you thought about this before? In your opinion, is it skill? Is it physical strength? Is it based on temperament? What differences are biological compared with those that are socially constructed? Schema theory provides us with an understanding of gender-based messages and how they impact us. The figure here has two pictures. One is blue and is meant to represent a boy. The pink figure is meant to represent a girl. Each has a bubble over its head saying, "I'm a girl, so I must act like a girl," or "I'm a boy, so I must act like a boy." So what does it mean to act like a boy or act like a girl? So one thing that gives us an idea of what it means to act like a boy or act like a girl is gender ideology. This is defined as the collective representations that pressure men and women into acting certain ways. For example, boys don't cry, or women must be nurturing. What other ones can you think of that are common? Now here's the rub. What if you are a woman but you don't consider yourself to be nurturing? Does that mean that you're not acting like a girl? Interesting is that differences in sex roles are pretty universal across countries and cultures. For example, some research by Gorgeous and colleagues, where they conducted a study in 2006 in 27 countries. They found that women did most of the housework. Fathers were mostly concerned with finances, expressive issues, and childcare in all countries. Mothers were concerned with childcare only in less affluent countries. They also found that cultures differed in nature and intensity of the differentiation between the sexes, gender roles and expectations, and stereotypes, meaning that in some cultures those differences were very pronounced, and in others they really were not. Pause for a second and think of 5 adjectives that describe men and 5 that describe women. Do not cheat and skip ahead. What's interesting here is that studies show that we express a high level of agreement on the adjectives that we commonly use to describe males and females. The words most often used to describe men are stronger and indicate greater activity levels than those used to describe women. We do, however, see differences across countries on which gender is described more favorably. For example, in Japan and South Africa, male characteristics are considered more favorably, while in Italy and Peru, for example, female characteristics are described more favorably. Interesting, huh? Looking across cultures, we see several areas of difference when it comes to gender roles and expectations. One is wealth. Another obvious one is the importance of traditional gender roles to cultural values. Are they emphasized or minimized? How strong is gender differentiation? What is the role of social policies? For example, is maternity leave commonly available or really just maternity leave? Is the culture more individualistic or communal? How important or valued is masculinity? Some countries have high importance and some low, as you can see listed. And finally, what is the role of religion in a given culture? We often find that societies with more traditional religious values also have more conservative beliefs about gender roles. When considering mental health, like culture and diversity, questions were raised about the traditional psychological theories and approaches and how applicable they were to women. Remember, they were mostly developed by white men. In fact, while women participated in some of the efficacy and other studies of therapeutic approaches, gender was often not studied as a potential area of difference, meaning they did not always look to see if an approach was more or less effective with men or with women. This provided motivation to take a new look at psychological theories through the lens of the needs of women, just like we did when we recognized the needs of individuals from diverse cultures. Something that came out of this examination was feminist theory. You probably have heard a bit about feminist theory in your counseling theories class, so I'm putting these notes together for a quick reference only. The basic stance is that the previously developed approaches did not really fully consider how the social and relational environment impacted how the person perceived and responded to life events. By adding this perspective, we have gained a greater appreciation for the female, culturally diverse view of life and events, and we see the political and social nature of presenting issues. We're really missing these parts of the story by not looking at these factors before. Two major assumptions of feminist theory. One is that people should be equal, and this is reflected even in the counselor-client relationship. Also, we all exist in a society system that can be discriminatory. Therefore, it's important to not automatically blame the client for his or her problems. We really have to look at the system to see what impact it's having on the situation. This thought should sound pretty familiar. It was present in some of the earlier chapters in the book when we talked about cultural diversity and the impact of the system. Feminist theory, like some other therapeutic approaches, is critical of traditional assessment because of the lack of attention to contextual factors and the strong influence of social norms. Also, in the DSM-4, we saw some clear gender differences in diagnostic categories, which we really should not see. Borderline personality disorder was one example. Women were greatly overrepresented among this population. Instead, for assessment, feminist theory proposes the CPSS model approach, and that's to promote self-awareness, strength, and ability to confront oppressive social forces. So the CPSS stands for context, life phase, constructive stage, and personality style. So client-presented issues are to be assessed within that framework. What's the context? What's the life phase of the person? What's the constructive stage that can be addressed? And what is this person's personality style like? In feminist theory, the relationship is considered key to successful therapy. The counselor should create a safe space for change to occur and focus on relationship style and providing demystifying strategies about therapy, meaning that you should walk the client through what's occurring, and also self-disclosing when appropriate as a means of supporting equality in the relationship. Looking at gender in counseling, we see some issues that are more prominent for men in our culture than women, and some where gender just plays a role for either men or women. For example, how are emotions typically expressed for men and for women? For example, Men will often express anger instead of sadness or fear, and women are more likely to express feelings of anxiety or worry. Some men may seek to avoid seeming too feminine, and some women will seek to avoid seeming too masculine. For both genders, for everybody, we have to balance the pressure of career and family. And by not balancing this, we can wind up with feelings of overwork, stress, and not really pay attention to leisure and our health. In some families, and these can be same-sex families or men-women families, they have very clear breakdowns of responsibility. Some don't really. Sometimes the breakdown of tasks can be some are more women-oriented and some are more men-oriented based on more traditional gender norms. Sometimes they're not. An example I saw recently in the newspaper was a whole story about men in cooking. There was a few people wrote in to talk about men who have a primary responsibility for meal prep in their families. They want to address the stereotypes about that. Women have gained more attention recently for working outside the home at greater rates than before, but still maintaining the majority of the household responsibilities too. Now, this is something that's shifting and is going to be different from family to family. For men in particular, there can be some potential issues around success, power, competition, and fear. Also, how they express love and affection for other men. For example, if they have a son, their male friends, or their own father. This can be a sensitive area for some men depending on how they define their masculinity. So to summarize, we see that gender roles have both a social and biological basis, and this varies by culture quite a bit. As counselors, we should be prepared to recognize and address the needs of men and women that may be related to the cultural expression of gender and gender stereotypes. For our final question, question 10, I would like you to talk about what you feel are the most pressing gender stereotypes that may cause issues for future clients. I'd like you to focus on at least 2, if not 3. Your answer should include your thoughts on these stereotypes and how they may influence clients. That link is up and available, so you can submit your work anytime between now and December 12th at midnight when it's due.